You are standing in your kitchen at midnight, staring into a fridge packed with food, and you still feel a tiny flicker of worry that it might run out. You buy the extra bag of rice. You do not need. You rush to the store before every snowstorm. Here is the strange part. That little fear is older than farming, older than money, older than language itself. So, how did ancient humans actually survive starvation? The answer flips everything. You have been told, and the last part is hiding inside your body right now. Before we get to how they survived, we have to bury a story. You have probably believed your entire life. You have seen it 100 times. The starving caveman, ribs showing, eyes hollow, dragging himself across a frozen plain, one failed hunt away from death, waiting and praying for a lucky mammoth to save the whole family. It is dramatic, it is unforgettable, and it is almost completely wrong. For decades, that image was treated as simple fact. It even became the foundation of a serious scientific idea about why so many people today struggle with weight and blood sugar, the notion that our bodies are still braced for a famine that, for most of us, never actually arrives. But when researchers finally sat down and tested the assumption, instead of repeating it, the numbers told a very different story. They pulled together a large cross-cultural record of documented hunter-gatherer groups and asked a simple question. Did these people really live on the razor edge of starvation? What they found flipped the picture on its head. Yes, foraging groups hit lean stretches, usually seasonal, usually tied to one local resource, going quiet for a while, the kind of dip almost any community can ride out. But long, deadly, multi-year famines were genuinely rare. A serious shortage might strike a given area, only once every few decades, and even then, the group usually had ways to keep it from turning into mass death. Now, compare that to the farmers who came later, the ones we tend to think of as more advanced. Their picture looks far more fragile. A single bad drought could wipe out a harvest. Multi-year food crises show up again and again across early agricultural societies. Right there in the grain records, the price spikes, the written accounts of hunger. The people we imagine as sophisticated and settled were, in many ways, closer to the edge than the so-called primitives they replaced. Here is the part worth sitting with. Foragers, on average, faced fewer, shorter, and milder famines than the farmers who followed them. The starving caveman was not the rule. He was the exception. We turned into a mascot. So, why does the myth cling on so hard? Partly because settling down looks like obvious progress, so it feels backward to imagine the older way was safer. And partly because one influential theory leaned on that famine assumption for decades before anyone bothered to check it, and we will come back to that later, because it ends up pointing straight at you. That gaunt, desperate caveman you were taught to picture, he was never really you. Their first survival trick sounds almost too boring to matter until you realize you break it yourself every single week without thinking. It comes down to one simple habit. They never bet everything on a single food. Picture an ordinary day for them. It did not begin and end with a spear. While some tracked big game, others were pulling roots and tubers out of the ground, cracking nuts under the trees, stripping berries from a bush, wading into a shallow tide to pry loose shellfish, scooping small fish from a river, gathering wild seeds by the handful. Meat was welcome, but it was never the whole plan. It was one option among dozens. Researchers have a name for this. They call it broad-spectrum foraging, and it mattered far more than it sounds. Because the survival of the whole group never rested on any one food, working out on any one day. If the big hunt came back empty, for a week straight, so what? There were still roots to dig, nuts to crack, shellfish waiting on the shore. When one door closed, 5 others stayed open. That is not luck. That is a natural insurance policy, built quietly into daily life, without anyone ever calling it that. And the more different foods a group could reach, the harder it became for any single failure to truly matter. A drought that flattened one plant, barely touched a menu, built from dozens of others. Now hold that up against the farmers who came after. They did almost the exact opposite. Bit by bit, they poured their entire food supply into just 1 or 2 star crops, wheat, or barley, or rice, or maize, depending on where they lived. And yes, when the weather cooperated, that focus produced incredible amounts of food. But it also built in a terrible fragility. Because when one crop failed, it did not take a slice of the food supply. It took almost all of it in a single ruined season. All those eggs, one basket, one storm away from disaster. You already understand this instinct, even if you have never hunted a thing in your life. Anyone who has been told to build an emergency fund or to spread money across different investments instead of dumping it all into one hot stock knows the logic in their bones. Do not depend on a single source. Never let one failure take the whole thing down. Spread the risk, and you can survive a bad day, a bad week, a bad season. And you do this with food constantly. When you wander the grocery store, tossing in fruit and grains, and a couple of proteins, and a backup box of pasta just in case. When you keep a few different things in the pantry, so dinner is never one missing ingredient. Away from ruined, you are not just shopping. You are running the oldest food strategy your species ever invented, still humming along quietly inside your very modern kitchen. There is a second strategy hiding in this story, and it is one you personally gave up. The moment you signed a lease or took on a mortgage, it sounds almost too simple to count as genius. When things got bad, they left. That was the quiet power of moving, because foragers were not chained to one patch of ground. They could follow the food instead of waiting for it to return. When a valley dried out, when a fishing spot went quiet, when the herds drifted somewhere else, they simply picked up and went, tracking resources across the landscape. As the seasons turned, trouble in one place did not have to become a crisis. It could just become a reason to walk. There was no need to make a desperate last stand over a patch of ground that had stopped giving. If the land turned against them, they let it go and let their feet carry them towards somewhere that had not. That freedom did come at a price, and the price was space. Researchers estimate a single foraging group needed access to anywhere from 7 to 500 square miles of land, depending on how rich or how stingy the local environment happened to be. That sounds enormous, and it is. Picture the entire sprawl of a major American city, and imagine that being the range. One small band roamed just to stay fed, but all that room was exactly the point. It was elbow room against disaster, the space to sidestep a local shortage that would have crushed anyone, nailed to a single spot. And that is precisely what farming traded away. The moment people committed to plowed fields, dug irrigation, built granaries, and raised permanent homes, they anchored themselves in place. All that investment could not be picked up and carried over the next ridge. So when the soil gave out, or the rains simply refused to come on schedule, a farmer could not just leave. Their entire livelihood was rooted in the dirt beneath their feet, for better and for much worse. If that trade-off sounds familiar, it should. You feel a version of it every single month. The apartment you cannot leave because of the lease. The city you stay in because the job is there. The mortgage, the bills, the whole invisible web that quietly decides you are staying put, whether the season is good or bad. Settling down bought us comfort and roots and a front door of our own. But somewhere in that bargain, you handed over the one option your ancestors leaned on hardest. When the food ran thin, the simple, ancient freedom to look at a bad situation and just walk toward a better one. The next strategy used to embarrass the very scientists who studied it, and once you understand it, it might change the way you see your own body. For a long time, Almost nobody wanted to talk about it because it did not fit the heroic picture, but it may have kept more ancestors alive than any dramatic hunt ever did. It was scavenging, finding meat that something else had already killed. For decades, this got written off as a shameful little phase, the embarrassing thing early humans supposedly did before they finally leveled up into proud, skilled hunters. The evolutionary version of eating cold leftovers before you learned to cook a real meal. But newer, sharper research has flipped that story completely. Scientists studying human evolution now argue that scavenging was not a desperate last resort at all. It was smart, it was deliberate, and it was reliable. Think about the simple math of it. Chasing down live prey that is fast, alert, and actively trying not to die burns a staggering amount of energy, and it often fails. But a carcass that is already down does not run. It does not fight. It just waits. That is calorie-rich. Protein-heavy food for a fraction of the effort, and in the hardest stretches, when the hunt kept coming up empty, that dependable meat may have been one of the safest bets around. What makes this remarkable is that most animals simply cannot pull it off. A carcass sitting out in the open turns dangerous fast, crawling with bacteria that would sicken or kill most creatures that tried it. But the human body came armed for exactly this. Your stomach acid is brutally strong, strong enough to neutralize many of the pathogens that would drop other animals. Your legs are built for covering huge distances, so early humans could roam for miles, arriving at a kill other predators had abandoned, while good meat and fat still clung to the bone. And then came the real trump card. Fire, stone tools, and a little teamwork. Let them crack into marrow and cook away whatever danger remained, unlocking rich, fatty calories that toothier, better-armed scavengers could only circle and envy, put it together. And scavenging was never the sad backup plan. It sat right alongside hunting and gathering as one flexible, fully respectable way to stay fed. When the spear failed, this was simply another card in a very deep deck. And the more you look at it, the less it reads like a fallback, and the more it reads like a specialty. Other animals stumbled onto carcasses by accident. Early humans could plan for them, read the sky for circling birds, cover ground no rival could match, and turn a distant kill into a meal nobody else could safely claim. And here is where it turns personal. That same tough gut, those same tireless walking legs, that same knack for making the most of whatever is already in front of you. None of it got left behind in the past. It is standard equipment, and you are carrying it right now. You were never built to be the fastest thing on the plane. You were built to be the one still standing when everything faster has already given up. You are built to outlast, not just to outrun, but the single smartest survival tool your ancestors ever built was not a sharper spear or a cleverer trap. It was something far harder to see and far more powerful. It was each other. Here is the scene. A hunter brings down a large animal, far more meat than one person or one family could ever eat before it spoils. In our world, the instinct might be to hoard it, to guard it, to make it last. But that is not what tended to happen again and again in foraging groups documented all around the world. The successful hunter shared widely and openly, spreading that windfall across the whole band. At first glance, that looks almost reckless. Why give away food you worked so hard to get? But look closer, and it is quietly brilliant. Because sharing was never really about today. It was about every uncertain tomorrow. When you gave meat away freely, on your lucky day, you were not losing it. You were planting it in other people, building a web of quiet obligation you could lean on when your own luck ran dry, and it always did eventually. Researchers who mapped these sharing networks found something almost mathematical, humming underneath the kindness. The whole system was shaped to minimize the odds of anyone starving, clustering tightly around whoever happened to be bringing in food at any given moment, then flowing outward, hunter to family, family to band, in steady, predictable waves. The luckiest hunter one week became the grateful one the next, and everyone quietly understood that the balance would keep shifting. Nobody kept a ledger, yet the whole group somehow stayed even over time. And that is the genius of it. No single hunter had to be good every day. No family had to win every week. As long as someone in the group was succeeding at any given time, the food moved to wherever it was needed, and nobody crashed into personal disaster just because their own hunt came up empty. The wild, brutal unpredictability of finding food got smoothed out across many hands instead of landing like a hammer on whichever family struck out that day. Sit with that because it is more familiar than it sounds. This is risk pooling, the exact same principle running underneath every insurance policy you have ever paid into. Everyone contributes when they can so that no one is wiped out when disaster picks their number. Except there were no contracts here, no premiums, no companies. It was written directly into the culture, into the deep, unspoken rule that you take care of the group and the group takes care of you. You are still living inside that ancient system, whether you notice it or not. When you cover a friend who is short on rent, when you chip in on a group gift, when you throw a few dollars at a stranger's fundraiser online, when you say those 4 simple words, I got you, next time, you are not just being nice. You are running a 100,000-year-old program for staying alive together. Every insurance plan, every mutual aid fund, every quiet act of covering for someone who is down, it all traces back to a hunter handing over meat he could have kept. Helping each other was never a soft luxury. It is one of the hardest, smartest survival tools your species ever built, and a big part of the reason you are here to hear this at all. And when every one of those strategies failed at once, when the sharing ran dry, the land went silent, and there was simply nothing left to find, one last survival system switched on. The same one that is sitting inside you, fully armed right now, because here is the truth. We have been circling. When real hunger finally arrived, the ancient body did not just weaken and quietly give up. It shifted into a series of carefully staged survival modes, an emergency plan, written by millions of years of evolution, built to stretch one body as far as it could possibly go. It rolls out in stages. In the first day or two, with no food, the body burns through. It's quick, easy fuel, the sugar stored in the liver and muscles, while quietly working to keep blood sugar high enough to protect the brain. Then, as that runs low, something more dramatic takes over. The body flips a switch and begins running mostly on fat, converting stored body fat into a new fuel the brain can actually live on. This is the moment it stops cannibalizing its own muscle for energy and starts feeding on its reserves instead. At the same time, it turns the whole system down, easing off the throttle, spending less, conserving more, stretching every gram of fat much further than a simple calorie count would ever predict. After roughly 4 or 5 days, the body settles into a strange, almost sustainable state, running quietly on fat, deliberately slowed, patiently waiting for food to return. Depending on how much a person had stored to begin with, that state can carry them for weeks, and in some cases far longer, before the situation ever turns truly fatal. Your body, in other words, is an astonishing survival machine, built to buy you time when the world stops feeding you. It is the reason a healthy person can miss a meal, or several, and keep thinking, walking, and working, long after the plate goes empty. What feels like fragile hunger is really a slow, patient countdown, and it runs a lot longer than most of us ever imagine. Now, this exact machinery once inspired a very famous idea. Scientists proposed that our ancestors survived constant, brutal famines, and so evolution favored genes that were fantastic at storing fat. Whenever food appeared, those same fat hoarding genes, the theory went, are now backfiring in a modern world, drowning in cheap calories and driving today's struggles with weight and blood sugar. It is a clean, satisfying story. For decades, it shaped how we thought about our own bodies. But you already spotted the crack in it right at the start of all this. If foragers were not actually living through constant, savage famine, then the whole engine, that idea, depends on, starts to sputter. Famines that rare simply could not have hammered those genes into the entire species the way the theory needs. So researchers began floating a calmer explanation. Maybe our range of body types was never forged by starvation at all. Maybe it just drifted. Once an older, fiercer pressure faded, the danger of being too slow and too heavy to escape a predator, back when weapons, fire, and tight-knit groups finally made us the ones who were hard to catch. And that is where this quietly circles back to you. That flicker of unease. You feel standing at a full fridge, the way you can go, a little wild, around a tray of free food, grabbing far more than you need. The way skipping one meal can turn you tense and irritable, snapping at people over nothing at all. That is not a personal flaw, and it is not weakness. It is that ancient survival program still faithfully scanning for a famine that, for most of us, is simply never coming. The machinery works perfectly. It is the world around it that changed. So the panic in that fridge, from the very beginning, was never really about you failing at anything. It is a brilliant piece of survival gear that quietly outlived the danger it was built to fight. So, how did they survive starvation? Not with one perfect weapon, but with a whole toolkit. They ate a little of everything. They walked toward better ground. They shared their luck. They made the most of what others left behind. And when all of that failed, their bodies quietly knew how to wait. The truth is, they were far better at dodging hunger than most of us ever realized. And every one of those ancient instincts is still humming inside you in your full pantry, your backup plans, the friends you cover for. So the next time that little flicker of worry shows up at your fridge, notice it and maybe ask what else your body still quietly remembers. Because the starving caveman was never as hungry as you were told. And honestly, neither are you.